The city bustled with life, a never-ending hum of cars, people, and noise. Streets crowded with commuters, shoppers, and workers on their way to places only they knew. Neon signs blinked above, and the aroma of street food filled the air. Amidst all this, the rhythm of the city felt normal, predictable, and almost comforting to the people who lived in it. But, as any city dweller would know, there were always those moments when the ordinary collided with something far more profound. Johnny Depp, a man just like anyone else, walked down one of the busy streets. He was no longer the Hollywood icon he once was, but just a regular person. No cameras, no autographs, no flashing lights. Today, he was just a man in a jacket, lost in his thoughts, as he made his way through the crowd. His face, a little older, a little worn from years in the spotlight, was now hidden beneath a soft hat and sunglasses. He wasn't looking for anything special. He wasn't trying to make a statement or even draw attention to himself. But life had a way of surprising him. He had no idea that a simple stroll through the streets, a casual glance at a frail figure on the sidewalk, would change everything. It was a moment that would start like any other. But soon, it would unfold into something that neither Johnny nor anyone around him could have ever expected. Johnny's footsteps echoed softly as he walked down the busy street, the noise of the city a distant hum in his ears. His eyes glazed over the familiar sights, the cafe on the corner, the group of tourists snapping photos, the homeless man huddled on a bench. It was all routine, nothing that would make him stop and take notice. But then he saw her. At first, she was just another figure in the crowd. A small, frail woman, hunched over, pushing a cart full of cans and recyclables. The cart creaked under the weight of its contents, and the woman's legs trembled as she pushed it forward. Her thin white hair was pulled back into a loose bun, and her clothes were worn, a faded coat too big for her slight frame. The lines on her face spoke of years of hardship, but her eyes, though tired, had a spark of something else: determination. Her hands, wrinkled and veined, gripped the handles of the cart with all the strength she had left, pushing it inch by inch down the sidewalk. Her back arched painfully as she struggled to move forward, each step more difficult than the last. It was a heartbreaking sight, yet there was something oddly dignified about her persistence. She wasn't asking for help. She wasn't slowing down. Even though the weight of the cart seemed too much for her fragile body, she was simply pushing forward. Johnny kept walking, his gaze flicking to her for only a moment. He was startled by the sight, not expecting to see such a picture of struggle on a busy city street. But it wasn't his problem, and he quickly dismissed the thought. He had his own things to worry about. He took a few more steps, his shoes tapping lightly against the pavement, the crowd around him bustling in its usual chaotic way. But then, he heard it, a deep, weary sigh. It was quiet, barely noticeable over the noise of the city, but Johnny heard it clear as day. The woman, pushing her cart, stopped for a brief second to catch her breath. Her sigh was filled with such exhaustion, such resignation, that something inside him stirred. He paused. For a moment, he just watched her. The sight of her, struggling so hard just to survive in a world that seemed to have forgotten her, felt like a punch to his chest. He didn't know why, but he couldn't shake the image of her. Alone, vulnerable, yet still fighting. And in that moment, Johnny realized that he couldn't just walk away. The next day, Johnny found himself walking down the same street, his steps almost instinctively guided by the memory of the woman he had seen the day before. He wasn't sure why he felt the need to seek her out. Maybe it was the way her sigh had echoed in his mind, or perhaps it was the realization that he couldn't simply forget her. There was something about her, a quiet strength that spoke louder than words. As he turned the corner, his eyes scanned the sidewalk, and there she was again. The same frail woman, pushing her cart, her body slightly hunched but still moving forward with determination. This time Johnny didn't hesitate. He walked straight toward her, his heart pounding in his chest. "Excuse me," he called out, his voice gentle but steady. The woman looked up, startled, her eyes narrowing as she took in the stranger approaching her. She was cautious, her hand tightening on the cart's handle, ready to pull away if she needed to. I don't mean to intrude," Johnny continued, his tone soft. I noticed you yesterday, and I wanted to see if there was anything I could do to help." The woman looked at him for a long moment, suspicion flickering across her face. She was used to people ignoring her, to passing by without a second glance, or worse, treating her as invisible. She didn't trust easily, and help from a stranger seemed too good to be true. "I'm fine," she said gruffly, her voice raspy. "I don't need any charity." Johnny nodded, understanding her pride. "I'm not offering charity, just help, if you ever need anything." The woman studied him, her gaze sharp. "Why would you want to help me?" Johnny hesitated for a moment. He wasn't sure how to explain it, but something in her eyes, something in the way she held herself, told him there was more to this than just a simple offer. "I don't know. I saw you struggling yesterday, and it got to me. I wanted to offer something. Anything." Her expression softened, but she didn't answer immediately. After a long pause, she sighed. "I'm Mary," she said quietly, her voice tinged with something that could have been regret, or perhaps exhaustion. "I push these carts to make ends meet. A pension that barely covers anything. I sell what I can, cans, bottles, whatever I can find. It's all I have left." Johnny's heart tightened. Mary's words hung in the air, heavy with years of hardship. As they talked more, Johnny learned about her past, about the family she had lost, about the years of surviving alone, and the quiet battles she fought every day to stay afloat. Despite everything, she carried herself with a dignity that Johnny admired. As they spoke, a deeper connection began to form between them. Johnny was struck by her resilience, her wisdom, and the quiet strength that had kept her going all these years. He couldn't help but feel moved by her story, by the way she had endured the worst life had thrown at her without ever asking for help. It was something he'd never fully understood until now, and it made him admire her in ways words couldn't express. Over the next few weeks, Johnny found himself walking down the same street more often. Each time, he hoped to see Mary again. And each time, there she was, still pushing her cart, still determined to make it through the day. The bond between them slowly grew, built on small gestures and shared moments. Johnny began to stop by more regularly. He'd offer her a sandwich, or sometimes a warm cup of coffee, hoping to offer some comfort to her weary body. He started giving her small amounts of money, insisting it wasn't a handout, just a way to help her have a little more breathing room. At first, Mary was hesitant to accept anything. She wasn't used to taking from anyone, especially a stranger. But as the days went by, her reluctance started to fade. She began to accept Johnny's offers, though she never stopped protesting, always reminding him that she wasn't a charity case. "Just a little help now and then," Johnny would say with a smile. "It's not going to change the world, but maybe it can make today a little easier." They began to talk more, their conversations growing longer each time. Johnny learned about Mary's life, about the years she spent raising children who had long since moved away, about the painful loss of her husband, and how, after his death, she found herself alone, scraping by. She told him about the friends she had lost along the way, how some of them had turned to drugs or alcohol, while others simply gave up. Mary had survived it all, holding on to her pride and determination, even as life seemed to push her down at every turn. Johnny was struck by how she spoke of her struggles. There was no self-pity in her voice, no bitterness, just the quiet acceptance of someone who had learned to face life's toughest challenges head-on. She had endured so much, yet there was a calm strength in her words, an unwavering resilience that impressed him deeply. It was something Johnny wasn't used to seeing in the world of fame and fortune he had lived in. He'd met people who had everything, yet had nothing to show for it, people who had everything handed to them and still complained. But Mary had nothing, yet she carried herself with a dignity that most couldn't even begin to understand. As the weeks passed, Johnny began to see Mary not just as an old woman struggling to survive, but as someone who represented the countless invisible struggles that so many people face every day. She wasn't just a person on the fringes of society. She was a symbol of the quiet endurance of those who fight to stay afloat in a world that often ignores them. And in her, Johnny saw a strength that he had never truly appreciated until now. It humbled him. It made him realize how much more there was to life than what he had known. With each visit, their connection grew, and Johnny found himself looking forward to their conversations, to the moments of calm that Mary had unknowingly brought into his chaotic life. One morning, Johnny made his way down the familiar street, his eyes searching for Mary's frail figure pushing her cart. But she wasn't there. He walked a few more blocks, thinking she might have moved on, but still, no sign of her. His heart began to race. He had grown used to their routine, used to seeing her face every day, even if only for a few brief moments. But today, something was different, and the nagging feeling that something wasn't right wouldn't leave him. He spent the rest of the day walking through the city, hoping to catch a glimpse of her. He checked the corners they had met on, the benches where they'd sat together, but there was nothing. Just as he was about to give up, he spotted her. She was sitting alone on a bench in a quiet park, her head bowed, her frail body slumped as though the weight of the world had come crashing down on her. Johnny approached her quickly, his worry turning into something more, something he couldn't quite place. "Mary?" he asked, kneeling beside her. Her eyes were distant, her face drawn with exhaustion, and for the first time he saw her vulnerability in a way he hadn't before. Mary looked up at him with tired eyes, her usual strength now replaced by a deep weariness. "It's gone," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Someone took my cart. Everything. All of it. The cans, the bottles, everything I've been collecting to make a living." Johnny felt a sharp pang in his chest. He had seen her struggle, but never like this. The cart wasn't just the means by which she made money. It was everything she had left in the world. It was her survival, and now, it was gone. "I don't know what I'm supposed to do now," Mary continued, her shoulders slumping even further. "I have no way to earn anything today. No way to eat, no way to keep going." Johnny stood there for a moment, his mind racing. He had always known Mary was struggling, but seeing her like this, defeated, hopeless, it hit him harder than he had imagined. He couldn't stand by and watch her continue to live like this, trapped in a cycle of poverty and hardship with no way out. The thought of her slipping through the cracks in society, unnoticed and uncared for, made something inside him snap. Without thinking, he dropped to one knee beside her, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "Mary, I can't just keep letting you do this. You deserve more. You fought so hard for so long, and I can't sit here and watch you continue like this." Mary looked at him, confusion and disbelief in her eyes. "What are you saying, Johnny?" "I'm offering you a chance," he said, his words firm. "A chance to live differently, to not have to struggle like this every day. I want to help you, Mary. I'll pay for a place for you to stay, give you everything you need to live comfortably, and make sure you're taken care of. You don't have to live like this anymore." Mary stared at him, her face a mixture of surprise and disbelief. She had spent her entire life surviving on her own, never expecting anything from anyone. The idea of someone offering her such a drastic change was overwhelming. "I don't know how to accept that," she whispered, shaking her head. "I've never had anyone do something like this for me." Johnny took her hand gently, his voice soft but insistent. "You don't have to do anything for me, Mary. You've already given enough in this life. Now it's my turn to give you a little peace." For the first time, she didn't pull away. Instead, she looked at him as if seeing him not as a stranger, but as someone who might just be the answer to a lifetime of struggle. The following day, Johnny took Mary to a part of the city she had never seen before. He led her down a quiet street lined with trees, past buildings that looked nothing like the worn-out structures she had known. When they reached the apartment building, Mary stopped in her tracks. It was sleek, modern, and beautiful, completely unlike anything she had ever imagined for herself. She glanced at Johnny, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Are you sure?" she asked quietly, her voice tinged with caution. This place, it's too much." Johnny smiled gently, his eyes warm but determined. "It's not too much, Mary, it's just right." He opened the door for her, and they stepped into the lobby. The air was cool and fresh, and the smell of polished wood and clean linens filled her senses. Mary hesitated as they walked down the hall, her feet dragging slightly, as if she couldn't quite believe this was happening. When they reached the apartment door, Johnny opened it, and Mary stepped inside. Her breath caught in her throat. The apartment was beautiful. Sunlight poured in through large windows, casting a warm glow over the sleek furniture and elegant decor. It felt like a different world, one she had never dared to dream of. Everything she had ever known was so far from this, and the idea of living in such comfort felt almost foreign to her. Johnny guided her to the living room, where a cozy armchair sat next to a large window. "This is yours now," he said, his voice soft. "I'm covering everything. The rent, the utilities, whatever you need. You don't have to worry about a thing." Mary's eyes flicked between the apartment and Johnny, her mind racing. She had spent her entire life fighting to get by, and now, suddenly, someone was offering her a life of ease. A life she had never imagined possible. It felt surreal, too much to comprehend all at once. "I can't accept this," she said, her voice trembling. "This is too generous. Too much. I've never had anyone do something like this for me before. I don't want to feel like I owe you anything." Johnny shook his head, a smile playing at the corners of his lips. "Mary, I don't want you to feel obligated to me. This isn't charity. This is simply an opportunity for you to live the rest of your life in peace. You've worked hard for so long. You deserve a break." She looked at him, her heart heavy with conflicting emotions. The idea of living comfortably, without the constant worry of survival, seemed like a dream. But at the same time, it was difficult to accept such an offer from someone she barely knew. She had spent years learning to be independent, to rely only on herself, and the thought of accepting something so generous felt like admitting she wasn't strong enough to make it on her own. "I don't know if I can," Mary whispered, her eyes downcast. "I've always done everything myself. I don't know how to take help like this." Johnny stepped closer, his voice gentle. "It's not about weakness, Mary. It's about letting yourself be cared for once. You've been strong your whole life, but you don't have to keep doing it alone." Mary's eyes filled with tears as she stood there, overwhelmed by the weight of the gesture, by the kindness of this stranger who had become so much more than just a passing face. She didn't know what to say, or how to accept something so extraordinary. But one thing was clear: her life was about to change in a way she never thought possible. As the days passed, Mary's life began to transform in ways she couldn't have imagined. The apartment became her sanctuary, a place where she could rest without fear, a place where the constant strain of survival was no longer her only focus. At first, she spent most of her time in the comfort of her new home, taking in the warmth and tranquility of a life she'd never thought possible. The weight of years of struggle seemed to slowly lift from her shoulders, and for the first time in a long while, she felt a sense of peace. As time went on, Mary began to open up more. Johnny visited her often, bringing with him not just supplies, but company and conversation. Slowly, Mary began to share more about her past, the family she had lost, the friends who had come and gone, the heartaches she'd endured. Each story was laced with lessons she had learned the hard way. Lessons about resilience, about never giving up, even when life seemed impossible. Johnny listened, really listened, with a depth of understanding that Mary had rarely encountered in anyone. It made her realize that kindness, the kind that he had shown her, was not as rare as she'd once believed. It reminded her that even in the harshest times, there were people willing to help. People who gave without expecting anything in return. His gesture had given her more than just a place to stay. It had given her a renewed sense of hope. There were quiet moments too, simple, yet profound. Sometimes they sat together on the couch, sipping tea in comfortable silence, or walked in the park, chatting about life's small joys. These moments, though unspoken, were some of the happiest Mary had experienced in years. For once, she felt like she wasn't alone in the world. She felt valued, not because of what she could offer, but simply because she was. As their friendship deepened, something more meaningful started to grow between them. What had begun as a simple act of kindness from Johnny had turned into something neither of them expected. A bond built on trust, shared experiences, and the kind of care that only grows through time. Mary realized that Johnny's decision had changed her life, but it had also shifted her perspective on the world. Perhaps, just perhaps, there was still goodness to be found, even in the darkest corners of life. Mary, once a woman alone and struggling to survive, now had a new lease on life. The quiet apartment was more than just a roof over her head. It was a symbol of the change that Johnny's kindness had brought into her world. She no longer spent her days in survival mode, fighting just to get by. Instead, she found herself slowly healing, learning to trust again and embracing the peace she had longed for. Johnny Depp, a man who had once been a passing figure in her life, had become so much more. He was no longer just a stranger who had offered help, but a symbol of hope and humanity. A reminder that even in the harshest of circumstances, there were people willing to show kindness without expecting anything in return. Their connection was a testament to the power of human compassion and the unexpected ways that lives could change. It was a reminder that sometimes a simple gesture, a small act of kindness, could alter the course of someone's life forever. And as Mary looked out the window of her new home, she knew that, no matter what the future held, she would never forget the man who had restored her faith in humanity. Thank you so much for watching this heartwarming story of kindness, compassion, and the unexpected connections that can change lives. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and leave a comment below sharing your thoughts. We'd love to hear from you. If you haven't already, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new video. And feel free to share this story with your friends and family, because we could all use a little more kindness in our lives. Thanks again for being part of our community. Until next time.